Hello everyone. So welcome to the thematic discussions of anthropology PYQs. So here we'll try to identify themes and what kind of questions have been asked from those themes in the previous years in your anthropology mains examination. The first theme that we have taken today is from unit 1.1 to 1.3. So this theme usually deals with what is the scope and relevance of anthropology, what are the main branches of anthropology, what are their scopes and relevance, and what kind of relationship does anthropology holds with other disciplines. This is generally one of the most simple areas to write about in your mains examination. If there is a question on anthropology, its scope and relevance, relationship with other disciplines, this is one of the most simplest areas where you can write beautiful answers if you have read most of the syllabus. Okay, because it is interdisciplinary, you can use examples from different parts of the syllabus to accentuate your answer over here. Now see, here we have tried to segregate that what are the kinds of questions that we have seen in the previous years from this particular topic. So anyhow, there are two divisions in which we have categorized these questions. The first set of questions are from the topic scope and relevance of anthropology. So like I was telling you, this is an introductory topic, and with respect to scope and relevance of anthropology, there can be multiple types of questions here which have been asked multiple times. Right. Second category is about anthropology in particular. No, this is a kind of a technical, depth into anthropology specifically, where they are trying to ask about how can you accentuate that anthropology is holistic amongst the all sciences, why there is need to reinvigorate the holistic spirit of the discipline, as to anthropology is the most systemic, most holistic amongst the social sciences. So you'll find these kind of statements, and after that there will be a keyword that elaborate on these statements, right? So here you have these kind of questions. So what kind of questions do we see if you look at this theme? The first question will be around scope and relevance of anthropology. Here, this question appeared for scope and relevance of socio-cultural anthropology, but it can also appear on the same lines for linguistic anthropology, archaeological anthropology, and biological anthropology. Related to the idea of scope and relevance can also be how relevant is anthropology in the Indian policy-making scenario, or what relevance does it hold for contemporary India. Now, these kind of questions can also be asked, right? So we have to be prepared for scope and relevance. The second important question, which has repeated multiple times, sometimes it appears as just a short note, right? It appears in the form of biocultural approach in anthropology, or they also ask it as a statement altogether that the biocultural approach in anthropology is the hallmark of anthropology, meaning that anthropology is to be studied in a biocultural phase-based manner. Okay, it cannot be studied otherwise. So this question is sometimes studied as a part of human evolution also, when you begin studying human evolution as a part of 1.4, and otherwise it is also studied in the introduction. So what do you mean by this term? First, you have to try to understand the etymology behind each of these questions that have been asked. So when we say that there are two terms over here, the biocultural approach is the hallmark of anthropology. If I make this statement, how will I understand this question and what kind of answer will I write for it? There are two terms here. One is biological and the second is cultural. That means whenever we talk about evolution of any kind, whether it is human evolution or societal evolution, our focus has to be on delineating and underlining the areas of both biological evolution, right? And as well as cultural evolution. So both the angles have to be covered. For example, if you can relate with this, that when we talk about evolution from Australopithecines to modern Homo sapiens, we see there is a significant increase in the cranial capacity. We see that there is a feature of bipedalism. We see that the organisms become a bit more complex, right? The pelvic floor, the pelvis is designed differently. The feet come to be designed as platform. And therefore, as we move from Australopithecines to modern Homo sapiens, we see that a whole lot of changes have happened. Now, these are counted as biological changes. But the question is asking us to frame your answer around the biocultural approach. How will we frame this around biocultural approach? See, along with the biological changes that have happened in the organism, there will be parallelly cultural changes also that have happened. For example, we see tool making as a behavior evolves. Okay, when we talk about Homo habilis, which is considered to be the first handy man, we start observing that Homo habilis becomes very dexterous with its tools. And therefore, Homo erectus becomes even more complex in terms of tool making ability. And when we come to early Homo sapiens, we see there is a whole tool industry ranging from different types, from Acheulean to Oldowan to all different types. So the question here is trying to integrate the biological evolution, the biology part with the culture part, and then to put together that human evolution is biocultural, or the biocultural approach is the hallmark to study anthropology. Because we cannot study biological evolution in solidarity and cultural evolution in solidarity. We have to potentially integrate both the sides and take them together. This is what this particular idea means. This question can be rephrased and it has been asked multiple times, right? The third kind of question here is define anthropology and elaborate on any one branch. So where you have to give the definition of anthropology. At this juncture, I want to add one point that whenever you are trying to structure your answer, whenever you are doing your structuring, in the introductory part, there should preferably be a scholar name. Okay, there has to be their work and then their observations. Now, this will be the line of thought when you are beginning your answer. This is the preferred thought process. Having said this, I'm not telling you to replicate word by word verbatim definition as given by the scholar. No. Even if you're able to remember the idea which was given related to a particular theme, you can write that theme as well. You can write that idea or your understanding of that particular concept. Right? So introduction will work like this. For example, define anthropology, elaborate on any one branch. For this answer, how will I go? I will define anthropology, right? It's the science which studies in totality of humankind. It's studying evolution in every manner. You can remember any definition that feels to be easy for you, any scholar you can quote over here. And after that, you have to elaborate on one branch. So in the body of the answer, you will suppose take notice of one branch and you start describing the subject matter that forms a part of anthropology in relation to that particular branch. Right? For example, socio-cultural anthropology, it deals with the deepest studies of trying to study that how societal organizations that we are a part of have evolved consistently. The culture that you live in, how has that culture come into space? How has society evolved? How has the concept of marriage evolved? Right, so you can go on explaining upon the realm of socio-cultural anthropology, its relevance and its purview. Right, this is how the structuring will happen. The introduction will be written in 4 to 5 lines. I'll show you a sample also. So you'll write your introduction in 4 to 5 lines, preferably include a scholar name, their work, their year, and their observation. Not just a quote based on verbatim. That is not important as far as you remember the idea. Okay, then you will begin the body of the answer with respect to the question. The second most important confusion people have is in the body of the answer, should we use point format or should we go for paragraph format? This is the second most asked question. See, generally the aim for every student during this phase of your preparation is paper completion, that my paper has to get completed on time. To make sure that happens in a timely manner, what you can do is you can make subheadings, and then below the subheadings, in the socio-cultural based questions, theory based questions, you can follow a paragraph approach where you're writing 4 to 5 lines or 6 lines. Or if it is a biological anthropology based question or archaeological anthropology based question, then you can use the point format. Right? Having said this, this is not a hard and fast pattern. At the end of the day, you have to complete your paper, and to ensure paper completion, make sure that you use a combination of both the formats, right? So paper completion is more important, and try to replicate everything that you have read about a particular concept in the answer. That will make sure that you get a lot of marks. So retention of facts is also important here, right? So another kind of question would be, what is the relevance of anthropology? And then major subdivisions of anthropology. If you look at these list of questions from Unit 1.1, meaning, scope, and development of anthropology, you will see they are related to each other in one way or the other. The scope of a particular branch is asked, relevance of a particular branch is asked, explanation of a branch is asked, and the approach that we use in anthropology is asked. Like we were talking about the biocultural approach over here, right? Now, on the other hand, in the second set of topics, where there are questions related to anthropology, about hardcore anthropology and the way in which anthropological studies are being done, what kind of questions are asked from there. So like I was talking earlier also about statement based questions, where there are statements like anthropology is the most systemic, holistic study of man. Elaborate, right? So they have given a statement. It is the holistic, systematic, objective study of all times. Elaborate. So then you have to highlight, right, that what aspects of anthropology make it more holistic, more systematic. You have to think of those subheadings which will be a part of your answer, where you will argue for anthropology to be the most systemic or holistic of all the sciences, right? Similarly, if you look at this question, how synergizing the core branches of anthropology can help reinvigorate the spirit of the discipline, reinvigorate the holistic spirit. This question was asked very recently. So where they are saying that yes, there are multiple branches of anthropology that you have already studied: socio-cultural, biological, linguistic, and archaeology. But how will reinvigorating the spirit or holistic spirit help? It will help if you interlink all the disciplines together. How? That means findings from biological anthropology have to be linked with socio-cultural, and findings from socio-cultural anthropology have to be linked with archaeology. So there are interdisciplinary approaches where one field of anthropology has to be connected with other fields to give you meaningful conclusions. Only then it will be holistic, okay? Because there is going to be all-round coverage over there when we talk about this particular idea. Clear? So these are the kind of questions that you see. These are the model-based questions. Now, let us look at, how would you answer if we discuss some of the questions over here. So if you look at this particular question, this question is a short note on linguistic anthropology, right? Now, this question is from, again, your introductory units, where you are asked to write upon a particular branch of anthropology in detail. So what is linguistic anthropology? How will you explain the sub-branches of linguistic anthropology, and what relevance does it hold? So like I said, your introduction will begin with the preferably scholarly note, where you are able to point out that, okay, this particular format or this particular idea was presented by a particular scholar. Here, we'll begin the discussion with Franz Boas. Franz Boas was the person who divided anthropology into multiple subfields, and therefore we are talking about linguistic anthropology, right? So major division has been over here. Now, what is the relevance of linguistic anthropology in general? Why do we study it? What is its validity? So what will my body of my answer have over here? That since linguistic anthropology as a separate discipline has been asked, I should be able to write about the branches of anthropology, branches of linguistic anthropology as well, because that will explain hardcore that how linguistic anthropology emerged and what are its branches. So if you look over here in this flowchart, we are drawing branches of linguistic anthropology. So for example, we have sociolinguistics, which is studying the interlinkages between society and language. For example, If in a Japanese society, you would know that there are different terms which have been mandated to be used by boys and girls. Okay, for the same terms, for the same words, there are two versions. One is the male version and one is the female version. Because the female population, as per the Japanese culture, have to purposely use a more obliged or a more softer, or a more respected version of the said word. Right, so therefore you will see that a prefix like o is added to any word that has to be prospectively spoken by a female. Right, so why is this difference? Even for common words which are common for males and females, why do we have that kind of a prefix over there? Because it is believed that women have to be more respectful. Right, so this is Japanese culture, that society, and how that society relates themselves with language. Similarly, in different societies, we'll have different kind of language-based accepted paradigms. In fact, so much so that you can also relate social inequality with linguistic use. Right? So this is that forefront, socio-linguistics, where we are trying to understand that how language use is going to vary from one society to another. Right? So the second one here is structural linguistics. Now, if you break the term, structure of language is what we study when it comes to structural linguistics. For example, what is the syntax of the statement that you will frame as a part of the language? In English, we use the format subject plus verb plus predicate. Right? This is the format which is used to frame a particular sentence. So that happens to be the syntax. Apart from syntax, there are also certain grammatical rules that have to be followed while you are writing for a particular language. So grammar, syntax, vocabulary, words, all of that comes under structural linguistics. The third one is called as historical linguistics. So if you look at the term here, historical linguistics, where you are establishing a relationship between already existing languages and what kind of language do we use today. So even though we all belong to the Indian tradition, which has its roots in Sanskrit, but how many of us use Sanskrit as a mainstream language? No, it is Hindi. So therefore, depending upon what kind of historical languages we have been exposed to and what relationship do we have with the language today, right? And what is the origin of those languages? What are Proto-European languages? When did the different branches diverge? And what relationship was there between the languages of today and the languages that diverged, right? That becomes the realm of historical linguistics. And then we have ethnosemantics. If you break the term over here, ethno term has been borrowed from the term ethnicity, and semantics is the way they classify material and social aspects and relate it with language. For example, there are certain cultures where people associate dryness and wetness cycles of agriculture with color perceptions. So there is a Hanunu tribe, must have studied in cognitive anthropology. They have color perception based on the dryness and wetness of agriculture cycles, and they relate colors accordingly as well. They only have two broad categorizations like light colors and dark colors. They do not have the English vocabulary of colors and the detailed variation, right, as per them. So therefore, ethnosemantics focuses on studying how different ethnicities use language in their daily lives, what is important for them, and how do they understand languages, right? So that is ethnosemantics. And then we have psycholinguistics. Psycholinguistic means where we are trying to understand the psychological processes behind the usage of a particular language. What is the psychology behind you using a particular word in a conversation? Why are you using that word? What are you feeling about it? Right? So this is rooted in structuralism, as Levi Strauss said, that your cognitive structures mirror social structures. So whatever thought process you are a part of, that gets mirrored in the way you use yourselves and your languages as a medium of communication in the society. Right? So you will talk about the branches in the body of the answer. And since we are talking about linguistic anthropology, you also have to explain the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, that how there is an interconnection between language and thought, There are two versions of the hypothesis, the weak hypothesis and the strong hypothesis. The strong hypothesis believe that language, thought determines language, right? And the weak hypothesis is that thought influences language, right? And why it is still a hypothesis? Because there is no scientific proof, okay? Because there can be a word in the vocabulary of a particular language, but there cannot be any thought perception about it. And even when we are talking about today's world, where there is all kind of translation of languages that are available, so it does not make sense to understand that why a particular community would not have a word for a particular phenomena. That is why it is still a hypothesis. Otherwise, it was a very initial attempt to explain that what is the kind of relationship that exists between language and thought-based perceptions, right? So body of the answer will comprise all of this description. Okay. Now, if you look at this second question here, what is the relationship between anthropology and psychology? Now, this is from the main, relationship of anthropology with other disciplines. So here we are asked about the relationship between anthropology and psychology. Now, generally, this representation that I have taken is to help you understand that though anthropology and psychology are to be seen as two separate sciences over here, but we are trying to use the commonality between the two. For example, anthropology studies humankind, and psychology is totally the innate study of the psychological behavior of individuals. And when we are studying them, there is going to be a point of commonality where we are going to talk about elements of social behavior, human behavior, cross-cultural analysis, child development, and culture and mental well-being. For example, in anthropology, we have a school called Culture and Personality School. Now, that school uses the psychological techniques to try and understand that what is the relationship between culture and personality, how both of them impact each other, and what kind of findings do we have from there. So there we use ink blot tests or Rorschach tests, which are considered to be hardcore psychological tools as well. So what do we mean by this discussion? That though anthropology tries to study humans in its totality, we do use psychological techniques as a part of anthropological milieu, right? So therefore, they are interdisciplinary. There will be concepts from psychology which will be used in anthropology. There will be tests, there will be sample tests which traditional psychologists use to study the mind of humans, which will be incorporated as a part of anthropology as well, right? So that is what you will highlight over here. For example, you can draw inferences of human behavior to how they are going to, behave socially based on your psychological analysis, right? So the first points are on the similarities, because both of them are examining broader cultural and societal contexts that can influence human behavior. A psychologist is also studying that why a particular human is behaving the way they are. And anthropology is trying to use the psychological insights to understand humans and their evolution better, right? So these are the points of commonalities. So like I was talking about, ink blot and Rorschach tests can help in gauging the mental health behavior. Child development can be studied using psychological techniques, okay? Like from the Culture and Personality School, we have child personality studies done in Manus, and we have the adolescent study in Samoa, which was done by Margaret Mead, right? And we also study what is the relationship between culture and mental health. How culture impacts your personality or your mental health or the other way. So one subheading you will make for the similarities, right? And the second subheading you will make for the differences. Now, what are the differences between anthropology and psychology? We know that yes, anthro is more holistic because it is going to include every possible component from its sub-branches, whereas psychology is more specific because it is focused on studying the psychology of an individual, right? So this is ethnography based, where we use fieldwork tradition, comparative analysis, and scientific tests to arrive at and theorize certain perspectives or schools of thought. whereas psychology is more based on cognition, emotion, personality, and behavior, and it conducts experiments and clinical trials. Because the motto of psychology has always been to study human behavior, right? So here the views are qualitative and here they are quantitative, right? So this is how you have to approach your answers. So if there is a relationship between anthropology and any subject-based question, you will first write two-liners for both the subjects, then give a subheading of similarities between the two, and then differences between the two, right? Okay. Next question, most famous question, and it has repeated multiple times. How do you explain evolution of anthropology as a discipline? So we all know that anthro is a new subject, relatively new subject, and it has taken multiple phases, multiple anthropological scholars, and a whole set of research for anthropology to be established as a full-fledged discipline as we know it today. So T.K. Penniman, in his work 100 Years of Anthropology in 1935, explained this four-phased growth of anthropology as a discipline. The first phase was called as formulatory phase, where the initial foundations of the discipline were laid. So you will begin your answer like this. In the introduction, you will highlight T.K. Penniman in his work 100 Years of Anthropology, 1935, talked about how anthropology as a discipline has evolved from four different phases. The first phase is called as the formulatory phase, where formulation of the discipline is happening. So the early Greek scholars, so we have Aristotle, Hobbes, Herodotus, Protagoras, just name the scholars and what were their ideas related to anthropology. That you can write beneath the subheading formulatory phase, which falls before the year 1835. Aristotle has very famously quoted that anthropology is gossip of man, right? After that, we have the convergent phase. Convergent phase means where all studies being done with respect to anthropology are converging together, and for the first time we see that Auguste Comte is talking about societal evolution. Charles Lyell, who is a follower of principle of uniformitarianism, start highlighting that how societal evolution trajectory can also be applicable to most of the parts of the world, right? So the idea of savagery to barbarism to civilization is taking its format till the year 1859. Then comes the constructive phase, where actual construction of anthropology as a discipline begins. By this time, Charles Darwin has also published his work. We see that scholars like Tyler, Morgan, W.H.R. Rivers come to the forefront, and they start explaining from their own anthropological points of view that how evolution of anthropology as a discipline has happened. So university studies are happening here. That is why it is called as constructive. And the more the university studies happen, the more research work is going to happen, and therefore there will be more documentation of different kinds of communities, and there will be more ethnographies that are going to be written, right? So this is called as the constructive phase. And finally, we have the critical phase. Critical phase generally falls after the year 1901, where the classical scholars and their mode of thought with respect to anthropology starts to get questioned, and we have more contemporary schools of thought like postmodernism, Marxism, feminism, post-colonialism, and so they start questioning the views of the classical perspectives. So reflexivity as a methodology in ethnography comes in over here, right? So people start reviewing their thought processes, their fieldwork traditions, and how they should have gone about a fieldwork tradition, right? So with the critical phase, you can also add another phase called contemporary phase, the current phase, where anthropology has become a multifaceted research, and we do not stick to one approach or one theory. It is open, it is vast, and there can be multiple opinions over here, right? So like this, you will conclude your answer that evolution has happened in phases, and therefore when the right amount of research was done, there were ethnographies compiled from different parts of the world, we were able to document anthropology as a discipline, and it edged its way forward. Thank you.